Welcome back to Advocacy Alchemy with Professor Ross. Today we have a good one, guys. Now imagine you're driving through a beautiful neighborhood in Flower Mound, Texas. You see a $300,000 mansion, immaculate lawn, quiet streets, and you find a man that just moved in, but he doesn't have a mortgage. What he does have is a $16 filing fee, and no, that's not a typo, $16. His name is Kenneth Robinson, and he's claiming the house through a doctrine called adverse possession. Now, we're going to discuss whether he's a legal genius who found a glitch in the matrix or if he's just a squatter like some of the people here think. This is a very expensive house, and we're going to peel back the layers of squatters' rights. We'll also look at what the neighbors' instincts are telling them. And finally, we'll see what the actual Texas law tells us. With that, guys, let's jump in. This is a short one.
Flower Mound's Waterford Drive is lined with well-manicured $300,000 homes. So when a new neighbor moved in without the usual sale, mortgage-paying homeowners had a few questions.
What paperwork is it and how is it legally binding if he doesn't legally own the house? He just squats there.
Lee Lowry and her husband told me the house down the street was in foreclosure for more than a year. The owner walked away, then the mortgage company went out of business. Apparently, that opened the door for someone to take advantage of the situation. Kenneth Robinson told us he's no squatter. He says he moved in on June 17th after months of research about a Texas law called adverse possession.
This is not a normal process, but it's not a process that's not known. It's just not known to everybody.
Robinson says this piece of paper gives him rights to the house. It's an online form he printed out and filed at the Denton County Courthouse for $16. It says the house was abandoned and he's claiming ownership.
Okay, so you see a guy says he picked up a house for $16. That usually doesn't happen where I'm from, probably doesn't happen where you're from either. Let's talk about what the law is here. Let's start with the common law. Now, that term common law just means what the laws were originally, and then they eventually changed into codified laws that different legislators built out from the common law of what everyone was doing originally, okay? So at common law, adverse possession comes from Old English law, and it was designed to ensure that land didn't go to waste. If an owner abandons a property and someone else treats it like their own, eventually the law says the squatter becomes the owner. At common law, you need 5 elements. The easy way to remember these is the acronym O.C.E.A.N. It has to be open, continuous, exclusive, adverse, notorious. All right, that's the easy acronym at common law. Now, Texas. Let's talk about Texas specifically. How did they codify this common law idea? I'll say this also, there's also a term of years when you have to hold this property in your possession against all others. At common law, it usually was about 7 years, okay? And that's so the universal thought was 7 years. And legislators then began to piece out how long they wanted it to actually be. You know, maybe more, maybe less. Let's take a look at the Texas law. Texas doesn't use one rule. They've a tiered system based on their statutes. All right, first you have a 3-year rule, and this requires a color of title. Basically, you have a deed, but there's a technical defect in the deed. So say, for instance, I bought a house that was supposed to be a square lot, but actually it was supposed to be a little bit less than a square, and my neighbor owns one of those sides. Now they're saying if I live there for 3 years, nobody can test it, takes it to court, that little piece that makes my square whole becomes mine again, okay? The 5-year rule, all right? You have a recorded deed, you're using the land, and you're paying the property tax. If you do that for 5 years, the land will be free and clear yours, okay? They have a 10-year rule. All right, now the 10-year rule, this is getting more back into that old law of what adverse possession was. Remember I said at common law it was about 7 years. There's going to be the sort of 10-year, all right? This is called bare possession statute, all right? No deeds required. You got to stay on the land for a full decade. And this is what Robinson is probably trying to do. He's trying to get in this house and see if he can stay there for a full 10 years. If so, that $300,000 house or whatever it's worth in 10 years is his. Now, remember what that video said. There's no company out here that's in existence anymore coming back making a claim. So it seems like, hey, unless his neighbors make too much of a fuss, he might get a chance to stay there. All right, 25-year rule. All right, this is at the upper range of how many years somebody will have to keep a property. All right, now even if the original owner was a minor or mentally incapacitated, 25 years should give them enough time to be relieved of all those issues and make a claim against the land. If a person has the land for 25 years in Texas, it's theirs. I will talk about a quick case that I had, and we just really finished up here not so long ago. Now, this is over hundreds of acres of land, okay? And there was a piece of land that a family had owned since the 1950s. They put a fence on the land, and they even sold some oil rights to Standard Oil back in the 50s. Standard Oil was the original oil company created by Rockefeller, okay? James D. Rockefeller. Okay, so in the end, do you see what the catch is? Mr. Robinson has only been there for a few months when the news came, okay? I don't know what year this news report was from, but look, he hasn't been there at all for the 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or the 25. So he has a long ways to go go and a long road. And some owner could come back and say, hey, look, I have more rights than you. And almost everyone who has an interest in that house will have more rights than him, okay? Because he only paid $16. He didn't put in anything toward the value of the home itself. The $16 was for the stamp at the clerk's office. The stamp is paper, okay? All right, let's move on to our evidentiary standards next. They're important every time we have to deal with the government, the police, or when we're going to go to court. Okay, let's jump into the evidentiary standards. We talk about these daily, guys. We're going to start at the lowest, work our way up to the highest. There's 6 of them. The lowest is mere suspicion. Now, this is the level that really begins all actions, okay? This is when a person calls the police out. This is when a person just has, they're just suspicious of someone else. They don't have any proof that someone's done anything wrong. This would be the neighbors calling the news here, okay? Or the neighbors calling the police. They don't really know what's going on yet because they're not in his business, okay? So this is the neighbors watching Robinson through their windows, peeking out, saying, what's that guy doing? They have a feeling he doesn't belong here, but they can't prove he didn't buy that property through some private sale. All right. So at this level, the government and the police can't do anything. All right. They can get called to the scene and ask them questions. And they're asking questions of the person that called them out at mere suspicion. Okay. Why am I here? What's the problem? And they're trying to assess, all right, do we have anything here to even go stop somebody else? So moving up one level, we go to reasonable suspicion. Now, this is when the police can stop you and they can ask you questions. They can pat you down for weapons and they can try to get an idea of what's going on here. Now, reasonable suspicion is when the police or the government have enough facts and circumstances to believe there's some criminal activity afoot. Okay. All right. So notice that reasonable suspicion really goes more to criminal law than civil law. Okay. This is when the police can come out, they can stop a person. This is when the government, through one of their agencies, can come out, ask questions, see what's going on, see if there's some sort of violation. The perfect example here is when the police show up, they ask them some questions. He shows them an affidavit that looks official. Now the police might know that, hey, okay, well, he has his paperwork in order. We can't really do anything. He's showing some paperwork. They can call in and verify the paperwork is real. So at reasonable suspicion, they wouldn't be able to do anything and may not be able to move up to probable cause. So let's talk about probable cause next. Probable cause is an important one. This is where the police can arrest someone. What's required is that they have enough facts and evidence that would cause a reasonable person in the same position as the police to say, hey, look, there's enough evidence here to arrest someone for a crime. And there's a connection between the person that committed the crime and the crime we're trying to say that has been committed. So this would be where, in this case, Bank of America would need to show up with a valid deed and say, we never gave him permission, or whatever bank this came from, okay? We heard that the bank went out of business, so that person's not there anymore, unless there was another bank that has bought those loans. Or it could be saying that the house has been broken into and we have evidence of criminal trespass or burglary. Now, if that happens, and that did not happen here from what we saw, then the police might have enough for an arrest. All right, the next level, all right, preponderance of the evidence. Now, this is the first level of us going to civil court. Now, this case is going to be squarely there for a number of years, okay? This is where adverse possession cases live. All this requires 51% of the evidence in your favor to win these type of cases, okay? You would meet the 51% on each one of these by showing, hey, look, you did exactly what's said and you met the term of years, okay? So preponderance of evidence, this level means that it's more likely than not that your claim is true, all right? So his claim is that, hey, this house has been adversely possessed by me. I've been here for however long. He's going to need to probably be there for the 10-year range since he doesn't have a color of title. You obtain color of title through, that's a purchase. You got it either through, it was a deed that you received through maybe some transfer. Family member, you might have purchased it, but it didn't have the correct language, so it wasn't right. But you did live there as if it was right for that period of time. All right, anyways, so 51% of the evidence has to be in his favor that he has a superior title to the whole world. Robinson's $16 paper really doesn't stand a chance against a lien that's worth, anywhere $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. That's gonna be worth way more than that piece of paper, okay? All right, moving up one more level, we have clear and convincing evidence. Now, this level is also in the civil realm. This is when you need to provide more receipts, okay? Now, for these types of cases, this is when it's substantially likely that you have a claim that's true, all right? In order for the court to test you, to see if your claim is true, you're gonna have to bring receipts showing that, hey, look, if you have a case where you're saying that someone defrauded you, you got to bring receipts showing that how that fraud was done, what was the result of it. If you're a parent saying that, hey, look, my kids need to live with me and not with the other parent, you need to show at least 75% of the evidence pointing to a change of custody needing to happen. You also see this in mental commitment cases. You see it when you're dealing with government agencies. It's around. But let me tell you this. The one before this, preponderance of evidence, happens much more often, okay? Moving up to our highest level, beyond a reasonable doubt. This level is reserved for every criminal case in America. This means that there's no other reasonable conclusion that a fact finder can come to besides the defendant being guilty of the charges brought against them, all right? So here, if the state decided to prosecute Robinson for fraud or theft, now, I think with him trying through this adverse possession way, they're not going to be able to use that fraud against him, okay? All right, the jury would need to be virtually certain he intended to steal the property. What would your gut say? You think he's a genius or you think he's a thief? You tell me. Okay, so at the end of the day, Kenneth Robinson was eventually evicted by a judge. Why? Because, well, that gut feeling, that instinct that the bank and the neighbors had, well, it was backed up by law. Adverse possession is real, but I promise you, it's a marathon. You got to have some years under your belt. It's not a sprint. You can't just pay a filing fee and skip that 10-year waiting period in Texas, okay? The lesson here, the law is a tool, but If you try to use it to get a free lunch, the law usually bites back. Use your intuition to recognize when a deal is too good to be true, and always check the local statutes before you start beautifying a house that's not yours. Now, what do you guys think? Is the law of adverse possession, is it still relevant today, or is it just a loophole? Now, we're probably going to see more instances of empty houses coming up soon. Will we see more modern-day squatters? I don't know. You all let me know in the comments. What do you think? Share, like, subscribe to the channel, guys. Remember, this is Advocacy Alchemy. I am Professor Ross. I'll see you tomorrow. Everyone have a great day. Stay safe out there.
If you've got ideas or videos you want me to lecture on, send them to the queue. And come back tomorrow at 8:45 a.m. for another lecture.